The pool was empty. Just me and Tyler, like always. But tonight, something felt different. The way he looked at me, the way I couldn't look away. One touch, one moment, and nothing would ever be the same. A secret too big to hide, a love too strong to ignore. Now, the truth is coming out, and we can't stop it. Like, subscribe, and don't miss what happens next. The pool had always been our escape. Late at night, when the club was empty and the world outside didn't exist, it was just me and Tyler, two best friends, two teammates, two guys chasing the same dream. But tonight felt different. We had pushed ourselves hard, lap after lap, our muscles burning, our breaths shallow. Now, we rested at the edge of the pool, shoulders barely above the water, the cool tiles pressing against our backs. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights and the soft ripples in the water. Tyler ran a hand through his wet hair, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. He turned to me, smirking. "You almost had me this time," I scoffed, shaking my head. "Almost? I literally touched the wall first." He laughed, his voice low, warm. "Yeah? Maybe I let you win." I shoved his shoulder and he splashed me back. It was normal, or at least it used to be. But then something changed. I don't know why I noticed it at that moment, but I did. The way the water clung to his skin, the way his eyes lingered on me a little too long. The air between us felt thick, electric. "Tyler," I started, but I had no idea what I was even trying to say. He didn't look away. His expression shifted, his smirk fading into something more serious, more intense, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. The silence stretched, heavy, loaded with something unspoken. And then, without thinking, I moved closer. Just an inch, then another. And he didn't stop me. I could feel the warmth of his breath, the heat radiating off his skin despite the cool water around us. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Then his hand brushed against mine under the water. A simple touch, subtle, intentional. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. And that was the moment everything changed. Neither of us moved. The water around us was still, but everything inside me was chaos. His hand was still there. His touch still burned. I should have pulled away. I should have said something. I should have done anything other than just stay there, frozen, wanting more. Tyler swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. His lips parted slightly like he was about to say something, but he didn't. He just stared at me, eyes dark, unreadable. I knew this was wrong, but why didn't it feel that way? The club was empty. No one was watching. No one could see this moment except for us. I turned my hand, my fingers brushing against his. Tyler inhaled sharply, and then he pulled away. Not fast, not like he was disgusted, but like he was scared, like he didn't know what the hell had just happened. "We should get out," he muttered, suddenly pushing off the edge and swimming toward the ladder. I stayed where I was, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What had just happened? Had I imagined it? Had I crossed a line? Tyler grabbed his towel and ran a hand through his wet hair, avoiding my eyes. He was tense, his whole body wound tight like a spring ready to snap. "Jake," he finally said, voice low, careful. I swallowed. "Yeah?" He hesitated. For a second, I thought he was going to bring it up, to say something about what had just happened in the water, about the way our hands had lingered, about the way the air had changed, but he didn't. "Forget it." He slung his bag over his shoulder. "See you at practice." Then, he was gone. I stood there, dripping, staring at the spot where he had just been. How the hell was I supposed to forget this? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, All I could see was his hand touching mine, his stare, the way he pulled away but not fast enough. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a mistake, a moment of confusion. But if it was nothing, why the hell was my chest so tight thinking about it? The next morning, I got to practice early. The smell of chlorine filled the air, the echo of splashes and voices bouncing off the high ceilings. My stomach was in knots. Then I saw him. Tyler stood near the edge of the pool, stretching, acting like nothing had happened, like last night never existed. My heart clenched. I walked over, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Hey." He glanced at me. A split-second hesitation, then a casual smirk. "Hey, man." That was it. No awkwardness, no tension, at least not from him. How could he be so damn good at pretending? Coach blew the whistle, calling us to the lanes. I barely heard his instructions. I was too busy watching Tyler, searching for any sign that he was thinking about it too. Nothing. The whistle blew again. I dove in. Lap after lap, I pushed myself harder than usual, like I could outrun whatever the hell was happening inside me. But no matter how hard I swam, the thoughts stayed. When we finished, I pulled myself up onto the deck, breathing hard. Tyler sat next to me, dripping, running a towel over his face. Then, without looking at me, he spoke. "Last night." His voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise of the pool. My pulse spiked. "Yeah?" A long pause. Then he let out a breath. "Forget it." He stood up, grabbing his bag. I watched him walk away again, the same way he had last night. But this time I wasn't letting him. I had to know the truth. I didn't think. I just moved. Before Tyler could step out of the locker room, I grabbed his wrist. Not hard, not enough to make a scene, but enough that he felt it, enough that he knew I wasn't letting this go. He stiffened. Slowly, he turned to face me. His blue eyes flicked to mine, cautious, unreadable. "Jake, don't." His voice was low, almost pleading, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. "You keep saying that. Forget it. Like it didn't happen. But it did." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his damp hair. "It was nothing. Just a moment. It doesn't mean anything." Bullshit. If it was nothing, why was he avoiding me? Why had he pulled away like he was afraid? I swallowed hard. "Then why won't you look me in the eye?" His jaw tensed. He clenched his fists, then finally met my gaze. The look on his face nearly knocked the air out of me. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was fear. "Jake." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper, and just like that, the tension shattered. Before I knew what I was doing, I pulled him into the nearest shower stall, slamming the door behind us. The sound echoed through the empty locker room, but I didn't care. I needed answers. The only light came from the overhead fluorescents, casting sharp shadows across his face. We were too close, too aware of every breath, every drop of water still clinging to our skin. Tyler backed up against the cold tiles, his chest rising and falling like he had just finished a race. I wasn't letting him run this time. "Tell me the truth," I demanded. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking. He squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing uneven. "I can't." "You can." Silence. Then, finally, he cracked. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw, stripped of all defenses. "It scares me, okay?" His eyes met mine, filled with something I'd never seen before. "Because if I admit it, if I say it out loud, then it's real." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. He felt it too. All this time, I thought I was the only one drowning in this. But he was right there with me. I didn't think. didn't hesitate. I reached for him, and this time, he didn't pull away. His lips crashed into mine, urgent, desperate, like he'd been holding back for years. Like the dam had finally broken, and there was no stopping it now. The kiss was messy, breathless, pure need. His hands gripped my shoulders, pulling me closer, my fingers tangled in his damp hair. The world outside that stall didn't exist. Nothing existed except this moment, this feeling, this truth. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasping for air, he rested his forehead against mine. "What the hell do we do now?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was there was no going back. We stood there, still catching our breath, our bodies pressed against the cold tile. The weight of what had just happened settled between us, heavy, undeniable. There was no more pretending, no more running. Tyler's hands were still gripping my shoulders, as if he was afraid that if he let go, the whole moment would disappear. His forehead rested against mine, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The fear, the want, the war raging inside him. "Jake." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "This is insane." I let out a breathless laugh. "Yeah, it is." He pulled back slightly, his eyes scanning my face like he was searching for something. Reassurance, maybe, or permission to believe this was real. "Do you regret it?" I asked. A long pause. Then, finally, he shook his head. "No." Relief crashed over me, but before I could say anything, the sound of the locker room door slamming open made us both freeze. Voices, footsteps, too many of them. We looked at each other, panic flashing in his eyes. We were trapped. Tyler yanked the stall door open, grabbing my wrist. "We need to get out of here." We barely made it out of the showers before we saw them. Tyler's older brother, Matt, and his father, Coach Brooks, standing near the entrance. Shit. Matt's face twisted in confusion as he took in our soaking wet clothes, our flushed faces. "What the hell were you two doing in there?" Tyler went rigid beside me. His grip on my wrist tightened for half a second before he let go, stepping forward. "Nothing." His voice was too sharp, too defensive. His father's gaze flicked between us, his expression unreadable. But I saw it, the suspicion, the calculation, and then, like a switch flipping, he understood. His eyes went cold, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice was like ice. "Tell me, it's not what I think it is." Tyler said nothing. Matt's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Wait, are you serious?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You're kidding, right? You're actually... Matt, shut up." Tyler's voice was sharp, but I could hear the tremor underneath. Matt turned to his father, his face twisted in disbelief. "You knew?" Coach Brooks didn't answer. He just stared at his son, his face a mask of stone. And that silence was worse than anything he could have said. Tyler swallowed hard. "Dad, enough." His father's voice was low, tight. "Go home." It wasn't a suggestion. Tyler hesitated, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he would fight back, say something, anything. But then his shoulders slumped. He turned without another word, walking past his father and brother like a ghost. Matt shook his head, scoffing before following. And then it was just me and Coach Brooks. His stare pinned me in place. "Stay away from my son." His voice was quiet, but there was nothing soft about it. I should have said something. I should have defended myself, defended Tyler. But I didn't. I just stood there as he walked away, and for the first time, I felt like I was drowning. I stood frozen in the locker room, my skin still damp, my mind racing. The weight of what had just happened crushed my chest like a boulder. Coach Brooks knew. Matt knew. Tyler's family knew. And by the way they had looked at us, there was no going back. I grabbed my bag with shaky hands and rushed out of the club. My only thought was Tyler. I found him outside, leaning against his car, his head tilted back, staring at the night sky. He didn't move when I approached, but I could see it. His body was tense, his fists clenched. "Tyler!" My voice barely carried in the cool air. He exhaled slowly, finally looking at me. His eyes were red, his expression unreadable. "They hate me, Jake." The words hit me like a punch. "No, they don't." "Yes, they do." His voice cracked, his control slipping. "You saw the way my dad looked at me. He couldn't even say it. Couldn't even call me his son." I swallowed hard, stepping closer. "We'll figure this out." He let out a bitter laugh. "Figure it out? Jake, my family is my whole life, and now I don't even know if I have one anymore." Silence, the kind that wrapped around us like a noose. Then his eyes met mine again, and this time there was something new, something reckless. "Let's leave." The words stunned me. "What?" "Let's get out of here." His voice was rushed, desperate. "We pack our bags, we take the car, and we drive. Just go somewhere. Anywhere." I stared at him. "Tyler, that's insane." "Is it?" He stepped closer, and suddenly the tension shifted. His hands gripped mine, tight, like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "Tell me what's left for us here, Jake. Tell me why we should stay." I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because he was right. If we stayed, Tyler would have to face his father's cold silence, his brother's disgust, his family's disappointment. And me? I'd have to watch him suffer, knowing I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Unless we ran. I let out a slow breath, heart hammering against my ribs. "You're serious?" His grip tightened. "I've never been more serious in my life." I searched his face for doubt, but there was none. Then, in that moment, I made my choice. "Okay." A breath of relief escaped his lips. "Okay." I nodded. "Let's do it." Tyler exhaled sharply, a smile ghosting his lips for the first time that night. And just like that, it was decided. We weren't just running away. We were running towards something bigger than fear, bigger than doubt, bigger than the world that told us we weren't allowed to exist. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt free. Jake and Tyler's story isn't just about romance. It's about the courage to be true to yourself, even when the world tells you not to. It's about the weight of expectations, the fear of disappointing those we love, and the terrifying leap into the unknown in search of something real. From the very beginning, their connection was more than just friendship. It was built in the silence between words, in the way their hands lingered under the water, in the stolen glances that held more meaning than either of them was ready to admit. But as much as they tried to suppress it, as much as they tried to convince themselves that it was nothing, the truth always finds a way to rise to the surface. And when it did, everything changed. Their love was never the problem. The problem was the world around them, the expectations, the judgment, the suffocating idea that they had to fit into a mold that was never meant for them. Tyler's family's reaction was a painful reminder of just how deep those expectations ran. The silence from his father, the disbelief from his brother. It was the kind of rejection that cuts deep, that makes you question your own worth. But in that moment of despair, Tyler did something incredible. He chose freedom. He chose to stop waiting for the world to accept him and decided to create his own future instead. And Jake, despite his own fears, chose to stand by him. Because in the end, love isn't about playing it safe. It's not about fitting into someone else's definition of what's right or wrong. It's about finding that one person who makes everything make sense, and being brave enough to hold on to them, no matter what. Jake and Tyler's journey doesn't end here. It begins here, because love, when it's real, doesn't sink. It fights. It rises. It survives. What would you do? If the world told you that your love was wrong, would you fight or would you run? Jake and Tyler made their choice. Now, it's your turn. Comment below. Would you take the risk for love? Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Because love is meant to be free.